The only way for you to know if something is for you or not is for you to try it. And that's exactly how I figured out hauling chemicals wasn't for me. I've been a tanker driver for 4 years now, and for the last 3, I've been hauling fuel. But before any of that, I spent a year hauling chemicals. And the funny thing is, if you'd asked me during that first year whether I'd still be hauling chemicals 5 years later, I probably would have said yes. At that point, I genuinely thought everything was going according to plan. But this isn't a video about why hauling chemicals is a bad job, because it isn't. There are drivers who make great money hauling chemicals, and there are drivers who genuinely love it. This is simply the story of why it didn't work for me, why I made the switch to fuel, and why, knowing everything I know today, I'd make the same decision all over again. When I got my commercial driver's license, I already knew what my end goal was. I wanted to be a local driver who could be home every night instead of spending weeks away from home over the road. The problem was, the one thing I kept hearing over and over was that local jobs usually don't pay what over-the-road jobs do. So I started asking a different question. How can I stay local without taking a huge pay cut? For me, the answer kept coming back to Hazmat. I figured if I wanted to maximize what I could make while still being home every night, Hazmat was the path that made the most sense. The problem was, I was a brand new driver. At the time, I only had about 2 months of local construction driving experience, and most of the better paying companies weren't even looking at someone with so little experience. They wanted 6 months to a year of over-the-road driving, and in my experience applying for jobs, most companies didn't even count local driving or the experience I got during CDL school. So I had to find another way in, and that's why I chose chemical hauling. It wasn't because chemicals was my dream job. It was because on paper, it checked almost every box I needed. It would give me over-the-road experience, tanker experience, hazmat experience, and put me in a much better position to eventually get hired hauling fuel. Even then, I knew most fuel companies preferred previous fuel hauling experience, but I figured having 3 of those 4 boxes checked was a whole lot better than having none of them checked. I also knew there were companies that offered fuel training programs, but none of the ones I looked at were hiring, so I committed to chemical hauling, knowing that if I stayed patient, eventually another opportunity would come along. And at that point, I honestly thought everything was going according to plan. Looking back, taking that chemical job was one of the best career decisions I ever made, but not for the reason I expected. Chemicals wasn't everything to me, but it was the smartest decision I could make with the experience that I had. Will this get me to where I want to go? And the answer was yes. On paper, it was the perfect plan. The only thing I hadn't considered, though, was whether the job itself actually fit the kind of person I was, because those are 2 completely different questions. When I first started hauling chemicals, I wasn't looking for reasons to leave. I wanted it to work. I had a plan, and as far as I was concerned, all I had to do was stay the course. But after a while, little things started adding up. The biggest issue for me was the schedule. Most days, I didn't know what I was doing until the day before. I'd get a phone call telling me I needed to be at the loading rack at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and just like that, tomorrow's entire schedule was changed. That made it incredibly difficult to have any kind of life outside of work. I couldn't confidently make plans. I couldn't tell my friends or family, yeah, I'll be there. Dinner, movies, because there was always a chance work could change at the last minute. Eventually, it started feeling like life revolved around work, instead of work fitting into my life. Some drivers don't mind that, but I do. Then there were the loading racks. Sometimes, I'd spend hours waiting. Not because anyone was doing anything wrong. That's simply part of hauling chemicals. Product samples have to be taken. The lab has to verify the product. Then, they issue the certificate of analysis before you're cleared to leave. And while you're waiting, you're not always free to do whatever you want. Some facilities require you to shut your truck off completely. And if it's the middle of a Texas summer, it's not exactly enjoyable. Now here's what's important. None of those things made me quit. I kept telling myself, it's temporary. I just need the experience. It'll all be worth it in the end. Because I genuinely believed that once I looked back on that first year, the paycheck would justify every sacrifice I'd made to get there. Here's the part that still surprises me to this day. I didn't actually realize how much I'd made until the end of my first year. Sure, I saw my paycheck every week. And every now and then, I'd get a really good one. Good enough that I assumed everything was going well. So I never really stopped and added everything together. Looking back, I should have. Then at the end of the first year, I finally did the math. After spending a year hauling chemicals, I'd honestly thought I made a lot more. And then I saw it. $59,000. I'll never forget that feeling. Not because $59,000 is bad money. There are plenty of people who would be happy to make that. But after everything I'd already been sacrificing, the unpredictable schedule, the long waits, the time away from home, the missed plans, I realized something. The reward wasn't matching the sacrifice. Even my boss was surprised. When I brought it up, he thought I'd made more too. And suddenly, all the things I'd been willing to overlook weren't so easy to overlook anymore. Up until that moment, I'd convinced myself it would all be worth it. That paycheck was supposed to make the schedule easier, the waiting easier, the time away from home easier. Instead, it forced me to ask myself a question I'd been avoiding. Is this really where I want to stay? But I didn't quit. Not immediately, anyway. I sat down with my boss and we talked. We talked about the money. We talked about the schedule. I wanted to know if anything could realistically change. The loading delays, those weren't really anybody's fault. That's simply the nature of chemical hauling. There's nothing my boss could have done about laboratory testing or waiting for a certificate of analysis. I understood that. But I also wanted to know if the scheduling and the pay could realistically improve. When I realized they couldn't, I knew my time there was limited. And I want to make one thing clear. I didn't leave because I was angry. I didn't leave on bad terms. In fact, I don't have anything bad to say about the company or the people I worked with. By that point, I'd simply accomplished what I'd originally taken the job to do. I'd built the over-the-road experience. I'd built the tanker experience, hazmat experience. The job had done exactly what I needed it to do. The only thing left was finding the opportunity to take the next step. And as it turns out, the opportunity came from the last place I expected. The funny thing is, I wasn't actively looking for another job. One day, I was at the loading rack waiting for my trailer to finish. Next thing I know, an owner-operator pulls up. He worked for Keenan Advantage Group. We both had time to kill while our trailers were loading, so we started talking. Eventually, the topic of fuel hauling came up. He told me he knew the people making the hiring decisions. He wasn't sure if they were hiring at the exact moment, but if they were, he could put me in touch with the right person. Sometimes the opportunity you're waiting for doesn't come from another application. Sometimes it comes from a conversation. If I'd stayed in my truck, if I'd never introduced myself, if I'd never opened my mouth, there's a good chance I'd still be wondering what would have happened. One conversation opened a door I'd been working towards since the day I got my CDL. And when that opportunity finally showed up, I was ready for it. When I finally got into fuel hauling, the first thing I noticed wasn't the money. It wasn't even the work. It was that for the first time since getting my CDL, I felt like I had my life back. I knew when I'd be home. I could actually make plans. If my friends or family wanted to get together, I didn't have to tell them, let me see what dispatch has me doing tomorrow. For the first time, trucking fit into my life instead of my life fitting around trucking. Now don't get me wrong, fuel isn't easier. In a lot of ways, it's harder. You're constantly loaded, making deliveries, managing multiple compartments, double-checking products, avoiding cross-drops, working around traffic, working around customers. There's always something demanding your attention, but that's exactly why I love it. Instead of sitting around waiting, I'm moving, loading, driving, delivering, back to the rack, then doing it all over again. The pace fits my personality. The schedule fits the life I wanted. And yes, the money improved too. But if I'm being completely honest, the money wasn't the biggest difference. The lifestyle was. For the first time since I got my CDL, I wasn't just happy with the paycheck. I was happy with the way I was living. And that's when I knew I'd finally found the job I'd been working toward from the very beginning. If I had to do it all over again, I'd still take that chemical hauling job. Not because it was where I wanted to stay, but because it was exactly where I needed to start. It gave me the experience I needed. It opened the doors I was hoping it would. And ultimately, it led me to the career I'd been chasing from the day I got my CDL. Sometimes, the job that gets you where you're going isn't the job you're meant to stay in. And for me, that job was chemical hauling. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.